Welcome everybody to Hear Me Out Podcast and Frank Analysis. I'm your host Franco, and today I am joined again by David Sparia and Charles Anderson, both of which are having some changes to their channels, which they will share with you guys. So guys, you want to speak a little bit about that before we dive into the topics today about what's new in your channels?
You go first, Charles.
Okay. Pretty much I came to a realization within the last week. One, there was a lot of people that I saw, saying things on their channels, sending things out on Twitter. Some of these are folks that I've watched for a really long time. And it was really like a gut punch to me, because in a lot of ways I kind of wanted to eventually grow my channel and kind of, they were my inspiration, right?
Yeah.
Eventually I had, the idea that maybe one day me and this person might be able to work together if I grew the channel big enough. But the original premise when I named the channel The Independent Report was I want to report on things and try to cover, and look at each side of it. Here's the thing. Some of these things, and I don't want to let a cat out of the bag, it's going to be our topic today, but some people may already know what the key issue here with me. I found a proposal by so-called progressives to be absolutely regressive. And if that's their idea to solving the problem, don't want to model myself after their channel to just talk. I kind of went through this phase of, do I want to continue to do this YouTube stuff, or do I want to just continue it the way I'm doing it now? Am I going to rebrand? So what I kind of figured out was, you got a lot of YouTubers out there, but there's not that many who are born and raised in Southern America with independent perspective, okay? And so because of that, I kind of brainstormed on it for a few days, and I arrived at the conclusion, as of June 22nd, the channel will be launching as the Lone Wolf Podcast instead of the Independent Report. It's going to give me a little more freedom to talk about things, unchained, just call it like I see it, won't pull any punches at all. I also, because it's podcast, talk about anything I want to, because something else I've realized is when you just focus on politics 24/7, it'll depress the hell out of you,
True.
All right. And then David, you're now the political refugee.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That was always part of my Twitter description. If you dig down into what I'm all about, I always felt like I was kind of floating adrift and didn't have a home, and so hence a political refugee. And I thought the refugee dig was also kind of in there because, we are trying to welcome refugees into our country, and there's a debate about that and so forth. So I figured I'd kind of tap into that. But my channel was called The Radical Independent, and I feel like I'm very independent, but I don't feel my ideas are all that radical. And, radicals have been in the news quite a bit lately. True radicals, people that I don't really bond with or have an affinity to, I can kind of see some of why they're doing what they're doing to some degree. But I think I want to be consistent that I'm a peacemonger. I believe in peace, both home and abroad. I believe that we should have a peaceful foreign policy, and I also believe we should have a peaceful domestic policy. So I think I'm trying to be more consistent. And the whole political refugee, a couple times I had to catch myself because I was saying things like I'm the political vigilante, and not to step on Graham Elwood's toes, but that wasn't the intent. The intent was just to be, more myself, and also to not be mistaken. I was being accused of being an anarchist and so forth, and I'm not an anarchist. I'm just a regular guy, suburban guy, husband and father, and, a little older, not quite a boomer, thank goodness, but close enough where a lot of people just assume certain things about me. But I want to make it clear that I'm kind of my own independent, sort of drifting, looking for a political home, and still haven't found one yet.
So me and Charles were on Big Talk, Little Talk with our friends Jeff Melton of The Bitter Pill and Israel, who's the host of Big Talk, Little Talk. I don't think we need much of an introduction to explain what's going on in this country right now, and people with their signs that say defund the police. So I want to get your perspectives on the wording of defund the police. And Charles, I guess we can start with you and fill David in on what we discussed on Big Talk, Little Talk.
See, yeah, we broke it down, and mine and Israel's take on it was to look more in depth and not just stop at what you see up right. Don't be blinded and the point where you can't see the forest for the trees here. Here's what I kind of brought about the whole defund the police. There needs to be a clear message to what you mean by defund the police. Donald Trump is a buffoon. We did an interview with Harris where he referenced this a little bit. He said, to some people, defund the police means to just starve them of all money so that they fold all together. To some, it means just outright abolish them without having to starve them of the money. To others, it means it's kind of a simple, let's rein some budget in, maybe not give them as much money. That's where my stance is on this, And to Donald Trump, he sent out a tweet, of course, saying that, defund the police, get over with suburban women. Well, based off where my stance is on defund the police, there would, I'm sure, still be some pushback from the people who were, super on the right and drink all that Kool-Aid. But the thing about it is, if we can cut Social Security, we can cut, Medicare, we can cut all these social safety. Why can't we cut the war machine and our in-house war machine when we've got police forces being trained by the Israelis armed with military-style gear? That's taking things just a little bit too far, and that's not the image of the police I think we need to have in our communities. We start to look more like we're being, dictated to, and we've got this violent, police force that could hop on you at a moment's notice. So that's where my stance is on the police reform. Then, of course, we will get into the whole abolishment thing, later. But that's kind of the gist of what we talked about. But I just wanted to, say that. That's where my stance is at. Some good, simple reforms. And I'll throw one more thing in there before I turn this over to Dave. My only cat with defunding the police is that I think you could still cut their budget maybe to a degree. I would have to see what the numbers would cost something like this. But if they were to keep the money got right now, hypothetically speaking, there needs to be something put into place that kind of dictates what's going to have to be spent in the sense of better mental evaluations for the people you're going to hire on. Because again, that's one thing that I've been talking about this entire time is how many people don't join, protect, and serve. They join because they see these protests, they see the riots, and they look at that as their goal opportunity to whack out a baton and go crack someone's head. They've got this violent itch that they have to go fight. And you really need to mentally evaluate people like that. Get in their head a little bit. And if they're that person, you don't need. So if they keep that money, they need to use it for things besides just arming themselves. They need to use it to screen who's coming in there a little bit better, in my opinion. That would be the only thing I could say maybe why we shouldn't defund, maybe just reallocate the funds to something better, perhaps.
Okay, so you agree with cutting the budget for the police force, but not completely abolishing it, which I also agree, but we'll get into some nuances about it. So David, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say this. I think Charles alluded to it a little bit where he was talking about Trump's not a buffoon and Trump's going to go after this because on its face, when people hear it, they're just knee-jerk. Again, this is very similar to like how the Green Party says, "Hey, we're running on eco-socialism," and people go, "Oh no, socialism? Seriously?" I mean, I want some stuff. Okay, I want like free college, and I want my student loan debt to be forgiven and so forth. But I don't know if I want full-blown eco-socialism, and you're going to have to explain that to me a little bit. And I've even told those folks, I've said, branding is important, like getting your message out, saying, hey, we're for the working class and so forth, and then explain it. And don't just throw terminology out there that's going to scare at least half of your voters. And I think The phrase defund the police does the exact same thing. And it might even be worse in some regards, because when you first hear it, you go, well, wait a minute, I need a police department. Now, do I need a police department that has a goal every day to go out and write so many tickets? Do I need that police force in my neighborhood? Or should I have a police force that goes out and just makes sure things are secure and looks around and occasionally maybe spots some trouble and takes care of that trouble, and doesn't prosecute everybody, but maybe breaks up minor disagreements and minor entanglements? Obviously, if we had different drug laws, if we had, in some states where, again, marijuana is still a felony or a crime, if you could rewrite those laws, you would, I'm sure, have a lot less policing going on, because it wouldn't be a concern to law enforcement. To Charles's point, I'm a constant. I care a lot about what's going on overseas. All right, I care a lot about how we are an empire when it comes to going all over the world and fighting battles and so forth that don't concern us. There are some parallels between our international policy and our domestic policy when it comes to the police. And so I'm thinking, hey, maybe we need to kind of take a look at, first of all, put it down to the level of what the police are doing. Are these missions worthy? Are the police going out on worthy missions? What is the goal of the police department? Okay, is it to protect and to serve, or is it to lock up and prosecute? Because those are two different things. Now, I'm not saying, and this is where you got to be careful, because this is where I'm going to sound a little bit like a right-winger. If somebody breaks a law, well, they broke a law, and they need to be brought into jail, and then, they need to go through the court system. Okay, so we've got to be really careful, because I tell you what Joe Biden did the day that all this went down? And I'm not, again, this just shows you how crazy this election is going to be. Joe Biden proposed more money for the police department, and through community policing, which is something that was big in the 90s, and supposedly it helped create relationships between the cops. And I'm not saying community policing is bad, but guess what? Neither one of these candidates are running to defund the police in the way that you guys we're all talking about here. They're basically going to run to see who's going to keep people more secure while paying lip service to the people that are being hurt by these rogue police officers that go off on the deep end. Now, to that point, briefly, and then I'll turn it back over, is that we've also got to be really careful that we don't broad brush the police force too hard. I watched this video, and I think Charles did too, of these New York City cops who are basically coming out to kind of defend themselves, a police union up there. I watched the entire thing, and by the end of it, I felt kind of bad for these guys. I really did, because you're having more problems, more than just one incident all over the country. But again, the brush that you're painting with is still too broad, and you've got to be careful. These guys, I think there's a SWAT team down here in Florida that just resigned. They're just like, yeah, we're too afraid. If we do the wrong thing, we rough up the wrong person, and they get it on video, and they didn't catch the beginning part of the video, then we're screwed. So why bother doing this? It's not worth it. And so, as far as your original question about defunding the police, it's got to be a different hashtag. I think it might end up being, defund part of what the police do, or reallocate resources, or do targeted policing. There's got to be a different twist on it. But again, what I would do is the same thing I would do with the military. I would say, what's the mission? What's the objective? What's your budget? What do you need for those objectives? And have we strayed from the original mission? The squad cars when I was a kid, I don't know if they still say it, to protect and to serve. Protect and not to go in guns blazing. And I understand there are times where you're going to have to do that, but it's got to be not the knee-jerk response. And again, hiring ex-military like Navy SEALs and stuff to be in the police, I don't know. Those are special forces, and they're trained to kill people and break things, and that's their instinct. And there are certain people that are designed for that. I would be very hesitant to hire them on a police force.
I agree that the terminology of defund the police is very broad, and it could mean a lot of things to different people. And some people actually do mean that they want the police to be completely abolished. Now, I don't know if I agree with that yet, because what are we going to do about violent crimes? What are we going to do about people are speeding in the highway, driving like maniacs, and they're a danger to people? There has to be somebody there that catches these people and stops them from continuing on, driving like a maniac. But I think that we still need to, for certain tasks, the police don't need, like weapons. Like if they're gonna be on the highway, trying to stop people from like speeding around, I don't think they need to have like military grade weapons for that, or to have like, I don't know. I'll ask you guys about how you feel about that, but to me it seems like for other tasks, like the police walking around looking to see what to do, like giving people like parking tickets and stuff, you can just have security in like parking lots and parking garages take care of that. And then, so I'm going to show you guys an article here that Jeff sent to us. Jeff Melton over at the Bitter Pill, he sent us this article about what people mean when what it would be like to not have the police. And what's written here in this article, what's it called? It's on MD 150 Future. And what they have written here is, we can live in safe and healthy communities without police. In fact, the criminalization and violence of police bring into our communities makes us even less safe. What we need are resources, the time and support to build a network of community safety providers that don't solve every difficult problem with the threat of force. The mayor's proposal budget for 2018 increases the funding of the Minneapolis Police Department to $179.2 million a year. Think about what that money could do if it were used to help people out of poverty or build affordable housing. Think what it could do if it were used to hire more social workers instead of more police. 150 years of investing in the Minneapolis Police Department certainly hasn't ended crime in our city. It is time for us to start something new. So I want to get your perspectives on that. I'm sure you guys agree that we can use money for better programs that could help prevent crimes from happening, like having better education, having more social workers to take care of family and domestic problems that are happening in the house. So what do you guys think?
Here's what I'll start off with, since you read on that article, and it talks that the police are bringing the violence and crime into our community. When I first got my start into the security world, okay, I got a job in security. I was loss prevention, okay. We had to carry handcuffs for the shoplifters, things of that nature. When we were, called to come over and get them out of their store, that's what we had to do. Okay. You want to take a guess how many cops I ever found? Zero. None. There were no cops going into stores and stealing things. Who did I have to call, though, when we got these people? Okay. Likewise, this idea that we're just going to replace police with the social work, well, referencing these shoplifters, care to take a guess how many of them just put everything down and surrendered peacefully because we said, hey, busted, put it down. None. Every last one of them had to try to run for it or fight us. Every last. And I got in quite a few scuffles with folks because they started throwing punches, okay? So, am I going to say there's no police brutality out there? That would be absolutely preposterous. But this idea that that's who's bringing all the crime and violence is a bunch of BS. There are problems, but you've all know. Here's the issue that I've got with all this. Again, people who are set to just completely remove the police entirely. I've been giving this analogy since last week, okay? If there was a tumor on my brain that required surgery, I would want the tumor to be removed and not my whole brain. That makes no sense. You don't apply this logic to anything else. There's a physical problem with anything on you. If there was a boil on my, elbow, I wouldn't cut my arm off. If there was gangrene in my finger, I would cut my, okay? If there's a problem anywhere, you remove said problem. You don't remove everything it's attached to. That's the difference between what we're seeing here and what folks are calling for, or some people. Now, David pointed out he's not an anarchist, okay? I have encountered an anarchist on Twitter within the last week. Apparently, he was my channel. And he shared a Rolling Stone article, 6 ways we can eliminate the police. And a couple of them stood out to me in general, but 2 in particular were the real bad ones. There was a third that I would put in second place, but these take the top of the list for me. Number 1 was eliminating the police and replacing them with trained mediation and intervention teams that are unarmed. So they're supposed to just kind of go out there and try to talk to folks and stop violence where it's going to happen. Right within the first 2 sentences of the description of what this means, it says, often formerly violent offenders themselves. I'm going to win an election on that. I guarantee you. If you ran, I'll put it to you like this before I finish. I despise Joe. I like Joe Biden about as much as I would like a boil somewhere between my legs. That's how much I like Joe Biden. But if I had only 2 choices, and one of them was Joe Biden, who has said he does not support eliminating the police, and the other was a leftist candidate talking about this, who have found the one issue that would probably make me vote for Joe Biden. Because this other thing is absolutely preposterous. Okay? That are violent criminals. And you're going to replace the police with that? It's insane. Okay? Not to say that every one of them will be bad people, but just think of the message you're sending across, okay, to a lot of the rest of the country who's not going to feel about this the way you do. You're going to provoke a civil war is what you're going to do. Because while there's just as many people who despise the police, remember, just last year, over 1% of the country said they trusted the police in a Pew poll. Behind police were banks, behind banks were public schools, and Congress came up at a whopping 11% in last place as far as trusted institutions go in the United States. So if over 50% of the country trust the police, and this is your idea, it's not going to win a popularity contest. The other thing that they went on to reference in this article was we should have direct democracy at the community levels. In other words, instead of, I guess, having court systems, we just vote on what we think is right, what is wrong, what is law, what is not. Once again, we could, who's going to enforce the laws, first of all, if you've got no police? Second of all, this idea that everybody's just going to come together and govern themselves. One, the old cliche, if people were angels, there would be no need for government. So you could argue that's the same case for law enforcement. Your whole premise is based on people having high superior morality. And I just don't buy that. I've met too many people who just do not live like saints in this world to govern that, okay? But second of all, when you leave it up to people's popularity contests about what laws they want to make for themselves and follow, or who's going to be held right and who's going to be held wrong here, you could very well end up with tragedies we've seen yesteryear, like the Salem witch trials. Know how well that went, right? So this idea that these calls are somewhat, they're some of the most regressive things. You know what I mean? And the one that stuck out to me, aside from those two, this is the one I said took second place. Criminalization of almost every nonviolent crime. The first thing I said to that was, okay, so identity theft and all things like that, we could go into a lot more, but that's just the first one right there, because in a growing age of computers, how many people are getting their IDs, their bank accounts hacked, they're ruined. So you're going to get rid of that as a crime? And he said, well, no, that's a violent crime because someone was hurt. Not according to the law reads now, it's not. No one was physically attacked. That is not a violent crime. Yes, it's a crime, but no one literally came to you and punched you for your social security. You probably went on the wrong porn site somewhere and they got your information and they hacked you and then they stole your identity and ran a bunch of credit card debt. Okay? So that's not a violent crime as things stand now. You know, so now you're trying to really get into weeds, and you're getting into this gray area when you're trying to start reforming what's going to be considered a violent crime. So again, people need to understand, address your problem. And the problem is what you see with the police targeting a lot of these inner cities and whatnot. That's because of laws that were passed. This is the point that I made. Laws were passed by politics. These laws oppress these communities. And here's how. They might go raid the suburbs and arrest a full of white kids smoking. He might go to the inner city and arrest full of black people for smoking pot. His job pretty much stops there, except for maybe testifying in court. Where does it go after this? We get to the court system, and the court is going to probably throw the book at one and give the other a slap on the wrist. Now, the cop was not the judge. He was not the jury. He was not the prosecutor. He was not the defense. So if that black man goes to jail, but yet the cop arrested both groups, really the cop's fault, or is that our judicial system's fault and our government's fault for passing such laws to wage this kind of a war on drugs? See, the police force isn't there on cap going back and forth on. So you really need to look at your actual problem there too, not just look at what you see in front of you, cops making these arrests, and say, oh, they're the problem. Are they doing these sorts of things? It's just like being in the military. You might not agree with going to war in Afghanistan. You might not agree with going to war in Iraq. People in Vietnam that got drafted might not have agreed with the Vietnam War. But your choices are either do it, the police force, you'll probably be fired, okay? Or in the military, you'll go to war, you'll shoot and you'll kill, or you'll be disobeying your orders, and we'll put you in the brig. Okay, we'll put you in the military jail because you're not obeying your orders. So again, look at the actual problem and hit that at the root.
So David, in addition to what Charles said and how people are thinking that we need to abolish the entire police force, would you agree that we probably should remove certain police from doing certain tasks upon which they would be better suited if we called upon them like how we call upon firefighters whenever there's a fire, as opposed to having firefighters just walking around waiting for a fire to happen and put it out? How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't know. That article seems pretty interesting because it really underscores, I think, maybe this sort of monolithic path that people are taking right now, trying to find fault with all police, and I just can't go there after some of the things that I've watched and I've seen, and what triggered this entire episode? It was a rogue cop who obviously applied pressure to this person's neck for about 8 minutes, which everybody across the political spectrum has condemned and said this guy is guilty and he should be prosecuted. Obviously, he's innocent till proven guilty. I think he's got $1 million bail right now, which is appropriate. The whole thing, I think, centers around, much like, this is going to be a weird analogy, guys, but I'm going to try it anyway. What happened with COVID-19 and what's still going on with COVID-19 right now is that there are a group of people that are more susceptible to getting COVID-19. Initially, it was thought that, if you were carrying COVID-19, if you were asymptomatic, that you might be able to just spread this without you being all that sick. It turns out, at least from the WHO, and I know I'm straying into a completely different video here, that it's a little harder to transmit this illness. So when you look at the people, the fatalities, down here in Florida anyway, it's mostly a lot of these nursing homes, assisted living facilities, however you want to categorize it. So I'm thinking, well, you need to isolate these people and treat these people and keep them quarantined and out of everyone else's way. With these cops, I think it's a similar situation. Once you start to find who these rogue cops are, you need to target those rogue cops and get them out of the force. Charles said something at the beginning where he basically said, look, mental health evaluations, all right, and making sure that, these guys who are all trigger happy coming back from the Middle East, and by the way, that's America's fault right there. That is, we are, and turn on television at night, and you're going to see shows. Obviously, a couple of them have been taken off, like Cops and Live PD is gone. By the way, I don't think the kids' cartoon show there, well, I forget which one it was, but Paw Patrol, thank you. I don't know if Paw Patrol should be taken off the air, but we glamorize and glorify this type of behavior in our culture. So, and I'm not saying you got to get rid of all cop shows, but what I'm saying is there seems to be a culture where all of this is glorified. If you shoot somebody, you're cool. Hey, I just shot that guy, he looked at me the wrong way. I'm going to be a vigilante. I'm going to go out there and take matters into my own hands. Or by the way, there needs to be constant evaluation, because you can get out there and get mighty jaded doing this job. I've known a few cops. I don't know any right now, but I knew some when I was younger who used to tell me horror stories about their day. And I don't know what kind of, personality they had, if they were more inclined to shoot first and ask questions later. But if you see the third or fourth instance of the same thing going on, whether it's a violent crime or a petty crime or whatever it is, you become conditioned to that activity. So I think a better thing would be to rotate these guys, from the desk to the field, back to the desk. If they have a bad week, they can tell their commanding officers, say, look, things aren't going good this week. I'm feeling a little stressed out. I don't want to kind of lose it. It might be good for me to take a couple of weeks off and, push some papers around and so forth and get out of there. There's got to be a way to do this without saying, you know what, we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. No more cops. I mean, as Charles said, when I started hearing that, I'm like, really? It's trending now? It's like, ban or what is defund the police is a trending statement on Twitter. And then I'm looking at it, and then there are videos, and then people are doing progressive TV, doing whole segments on it. And I'm thinking, how the heck are they going to sell this to the electorate? How are they going to do it? And again, Trump is he says, I'm Mr. Law and Order. Biden says, not so fast. I want to do community policing. So then you've got, obviously, third parties out there that have different views. But we've got to really examine this. Are Americans, are they capable of understanding that when you say defund the police, you mean what you've been talking about, Bruno, is that these articles are basically stating that maybe we can reallocate some of the resources, or the job descriptions change, or Charles made a great point about when people say, well, we're just going to prosecute violent criminal activity. Well, identity theft is kind of a big deal, and there are probably other things that have to do with cyber crimes and so forth that I think you need to prosecute criminals who, act nefariously. Law and Order, I hate to say it, Law and Order, Bill Clinton, you guys were a little young back in the 90s, or if you were here, Bill Clinton kind of branded himself as this law and order Democrat. That's why you had the 94 crime bill.
Yeah.
That's why he got reelected, even though he had this Monica Lewinsky scandal going on. There were a lot of people that said, you know what, he's kind of like a Republican, he's kind of like a Democrat, he's the best of all worlds. Joe Biden, everybody lined up behind the crime bill. And that's another thing that nobody seems to want to bring up, is the crime bill.
Yeah.
The crime bill was never repealed. Mm-hmm. The crime bill is still out there. It's still active. It's still doing its thing. Trump did some stuff with criminal justice reform, but you know what? I might start over at criminal justice reform before I would start over at your local police department. And the reason I say that is because if they've all got to act the same way, then they're going to, before they even go out there, they're going to say, oh, there's a law that now that I can't do X. Where I used to do X, somebody had a small amount of marijuana. Now I can stop you and say, okay, yeah, you got a small amount, but go home. I'm not arresting you. This is a warning. I mean, there's a way to do this without this sort of all or nothing approach, or it's really hard to explain, because then you talk to progressives and they say all day long on Twitter, well, Dave, you don't understand what we mean by defund the police. Okay, well, you explain it to me, and then you explain it to the population at large and the electorate and Democrat voters, by the way, who are overwhelmingly against that slogan. I don't know if it's a slogan or it's an actual thing, but they're against it. Obviously, Republicans are way against it. So it's kind of a lose-lose. And, Bernie's not your nominee right now. It's Biden or Trump or Green Party or Libertarian Party as real, sort of outside, low possibility parties. So you have to think to yourself, what's actually going to help people bridge this gap between the police and these minorities who are obviously still getting the short end of the stick throughout this, because they've been stereotyped and vilified, and I completely empathize with them. There's no question that there is racism in the country. It's just, again, my initial idea, like the COVID-19 analogy, isolate the bad ones and target and do a lot more mental health screening and get in there and do it often. Don't just do it like once every few years. I mean, these guys are on the beat every day, and it's going to be a constant battle to find out what's going on in their head. And we're humans. This is a tough variable, that human beings, they can snap. And I don't know what you can do to prevent that. You've got to have mental health professionals within. I guess that's where you might target some of this alternative spending, if you want to call it that. Invest it into mental health and try to see if you can get in the brains of these guys. But that's kind of all I got on that.
So
can I throw one more thing in there before we move on real quick, and I'll make this real quick, because I know you want to probably get on to some of these other subjects there. But here's a big issue. Again, when we look at how we can reform the police, there's no uniformity in the police. There's no uniformity in how they're trained. There's no uniformity in how they're structured in a way. For example, again, and I referenced this Friday night, you go back to Minnesota, and Minnesota doesn't even send them to an actual police academy. They send them to a college. Okay, this college trains them supposedly like a police academy. Or it might even be multiple colleges they could do. It might not even just be one. It's like a college class That's all. I'd rather you go through an actual police academy. I wouldn't want you to go through college to join the military. You go through boot camp, okay?
Yeah.
So you need to go through an actual police academy. That's a huge thing right there. But then you've got to also look at your different types of police. So what I mean by that is you've got city police, you've got state police, you've got sheriff's departments.
Park
okay?
police.
They're like three wings under one umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
Now, right here in my backyard, for example, you've got the Spartanburg City Police and you've got the Spartanburg County Sheriff's deputies. Okay? Now, it's been no secret in my neck of the woods that the Sheriff's Department wants to overtake the city police. They want to absorb them in. I'd be completely opposed to that. No. Here's why. City police are pretty much a jack of all trades and a master of none. They do the traffic, they do the wreck response. When there's a call, they have to respond to that. If there's a break-in and it's within the city limits, they're responding to that. This one cop has to answer all these types of different calls. Whereas in the sheriff's department, it's broken down by division. Okay, an auto accident, they turn it over to the state troopers. State troopers handle it. Sheriff's department doesn't do that here. Okay, they handle if someone breaks in, if there's a civil dispute. Yep, we'll go deal with that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you're speeding right there and they catch you, I mean, they can give you a ticket, obviously, but they don't have to respond to the wrecks. If there is, let's say, a crime scene investigation that needs to be done, they've got their own special division of the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Department who are trained to handle that, and they come in. City, again, you're handling the whole thing. Likewise, you've got, say, Woodruff City Police. Now, that is a one-horse, let me tell you, okay? Woodruff City Police are a bunch of Roscoe P. trains, okay? They're speed traffic cops who want to get you for tip money because they need to keep, their city hall's lights on, okay? That's what it is. They're such a small town with such a low population. That's their form of revenue, is to go out and do stuff like that. Literally, I had a guy, he stopped me going into Woodruff, 55 miles an hour for over 10 miles on this road. You come over the top of a hill, they put a speed limit sign that you can't see coming up that hill. But the minute you come across the top, it drops from 55 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour, and guess who's sitting right behind that cop?
Yeah.
Yep. As soon as I crossed that sign, he blue lighted my ass in our, okay? So you've got these different divisions. So perhaps maybe we should look at if city police is necessary. Should the sheriff's department operate everything? Okay? All the conflicting, branches of the police department could be causing a problem as well. But certainly, I think there needs to be uniformity in training, a uniformity of I think that would also make a world of difference.
So I do want to add on to what you said, Charles, about how they're trained. Some of these cops are also trained in Israel. Like, as they're trained as if they're going to go into combat. Thanks for watching that segment of Hear Me Out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell down below so you can get the latest on sports, pop culture, and progressive politics. Stay informed.